Julius Jewell is the co-founder of the fashion brand Heliot Emil. Heliot Emil has been recognized as one of the most successful up-and-coming brands in recent years. In a couple of years, Julius and his brother turned the Heliot Emil brand into an international success story. And all of this before they turned 30 years old. They went from making clothes in a small studio by themselves to being stocked in over 100 stores worldwide. The following is a short clip from our conversation together for the Beyond Fashion Business podcast.
Let's finally go back to the pink question then. Going all the way back into the evolution of the brand and how everything's sort of like gone from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and step 4. Keeping it simple, how would you describe those steps? How many steps are they? What are the biggest difference between each ones?
Wow. Breaking it down sort of very simple, I think there's not a one way fits all. It's not like that in the fashion industry anymore. It used to be like there was only one way that you could create a fashion brand, but I think nowadays with the amount of different ways of doing it, there's not a one way fits all. You don't have to have, like a even like a business to business, like a sell in stores strategy. You can sell it online. You don't even have to sell it online. You can sell it on Instagram, or like there's not like a one way fits all right now. So I think breaking it down into specific steps to follow is not right, because the landscape is just
Maybe not
so
in terms of
different.
specific steps to follow for other people, just what steps were the ones that happened for you in your particular
Yeah,
journey? At the very beginning, was it, we were just creating stuff at our studio and we were selling directly through consumer and the website. We got to this level, right? We couldn't keep up with the demand. And then we decided to reinvest the profits that we were doing into building the wholesale distribution. Again, just a general sense of how the
totally.
brand evolved. And again, this is not replicable because it's exactly what you said. It's everything is so relative in an ever evolving industry that you can't really take something that worked for a brand and just reapply it into yours and succeed. But just so people can have it as a point of reference.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I was just trying to, like also make it clear that, like what worked back then would not probably work today, or might work today. I don't know. But I mean, yeah, we started, just Victor and I, really with very, very little experience. I had been at a few different fashion brands before, and I've seen a little bit of how it works, but also, like I worked on some things for Alexander Wang, or then I started working for Hood by Air, and I saw like, those two brands are completely different. Like the structure and the setup and like how you approach things were like completely different. So there is not like a one way sort of like fits all. And you might be at a stage where, you're a 4-person team, but you're doing huge shows, or you might be at a stage where you're 60 people and you're just now doing your first show. Or so it's like there's not like a one kind of like solution for everyone. But we started, just Victor and I, really a lot of learning by doing. We created a collection, and we sold some pieces online. And then we were like, okay, I think we should find like a way to sell this to stores. And then we found out that there was something called like a showroom. So you would have like a partner who would help you sell the stuff before the collection was even finished. And so we were like, okay, let's make a collection. So we made a collection ourselves, basically, without any manufacturer or any, like any numbers or anything. We just like kind of made up something. What do we think this is worth? How much should we charge for this one? And then people loved the clothes. We had, like a crazy response, and we were like, okay, so what do we do now? And we were like, okay, I guess we have to find some manufacturers. So we started writing some people and trying to figure out how to manufacture these pieces. And what came back was like completely fucked. Like we didn't know
Yeah.
what to do. So we got in touch with someone who had a brand already, and they helped us a little bit on, like how do we
The
navigate
specifics,
this
yeah.
this whole this specifics, yeah. So we evolved. We got a little bit more knowledgeable, and we learned that okay, maybe it's a good idea to know these things ahead of time so that we could um, deliver on time and deliver for the right prices and like those kind of
With the
things.
right quality, yeah.
With the right quality, with all of those things. And yeah, and then I mean, we started hiring interns and to help us around creating these pieces. And for a long time, it was just like Victor and I and a bunch of interns. And even back then, we started like we maybe had like one or two employees, and we started to do shows. And we were like, okay, um, this is like what people do.
God
Let's make a
damn, was
show.
that that's very ambitious. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
didn't know, like
Right,
we
right,
were just
right.
like, okay, we could do this. We have a
Yeah.
bunch of friends who are like models or can film it or can take photos and like that kind of stuff. So let's just like make it happen, right? And obviously, it was like a bit of an immature decision, I would say, because we were not ready for it. But nonetheless, a lot of people saw the shows and they loved what we were doing, and it felt very sort of like raw and honest and those kind of things. And again, we were, like looking
That's
from an
fair.
outside perspective, we were great at packaging it.
Right.
Like
The
I said in the
communications of
beginning,
it
that
all. Yeah.
yeah, that was my expertise. That's what I did for a long time before, and that's how, like I did everything. That's what I knew. So the whole thing looked exactly how it's supposed to look, but really behind the scenes, it was like,
It
a bit
wasn't.
more.
The
It was
packaging looked
definitely not
great.
what.
The packaging looked
Yeah,
great, but there was nothing in it.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so we you live and you learn, and from that we obviously knew like we have to do something. So during COVID and just before COVID, we were starting to get a bit more sense of like, okay, let's restructure this a bit. Let's make sure that we have someone who's in charge of like production and making sure that we can live up to how this is looking, because it's starting to look pretty good. Like we're getting somewhere. We're getting a lot of people who are fascinated with everything, and obviously being interested in growing. From my perspective, I was just constantly pushing. I was just saying, okay, now let's do this. Let's do this. Like we've done Copenhagen Fashion Week, now let's do Paris Fashion Week. And yeah, I was good friends with Virgil Abloh, who at uh, when I was at Hood by Air also was working for Hood by Air. So we'd cross paths, and he helped us get on the calendar in Paris, and we were like, okay, let's take it to Paris. And then we hired some more people who were a little bit more experienced, who had a little bit more knowledge, and we developed more collections that were pushing us in the right direction. And yeah, up until I would say like rather recently, it's now becoming like the things that if you were to start a fashion brand, these would be some of the things that you would very first sort of like look into. So, what does your merchandising look like? What does your um, production setup look like? How does your supply chain match with your budgets, your like all of those things are now things that we're looking, we're not looking at, have been looking at for the past like
Yeah, optimizing.
2 3 years. Yeah, I mean, not even optimizing, just getting it to a stage where it's like the best it can be.
Right.
So I think that's something that, obviously going back, if we were to change things, that's something that you would start with.
Right. Of course,
But
having the good foundations.
yeah, and it's also hard because it's like the chicken or the egg, right? Because like if you start with that part, then you need extreme finances to grow then the brand side of things, because that's not just something that you grow one season to another, right?
Right. Two dudes in a
And
studio. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so yeah, it's kind of like which one is the correct one to start with.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of like the story from a very uh,
Fascinating.
choppy
So
point of view.
that's fascinating. Yeah, because I mean, it goes back to what you're saying of the complexity of this industry, right? It worked for you, but now that you look at things in hindsight and you understand the risks involved and where things could go wrong, you start wondering, right? Like, would I do that all over again in the exact same way if I knew what the things that I didn't, if I knew the things that I knew now? But I mean, it's part of the benefits of the ignorance and the ambition and the blind ego of, youth and starting things. Because I mean,
Absolutely.
sometimes that ignorance is your only asset.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be a blessing and a curse.
Mm,
It's yeah, it's what takes you, to the top if you have a huge ego, but it's also something that can break you down, like immediately. And if you're like ignorant of like the fears and the risks of things failing, that can be hugely beneficial, but it can also be your downfall.
right. Interesting. So just to sort of like simplify everything and make sure that I understand the process. So very, very early on, again, two brothers working on cool stuff in a studio somewhere. And that deeply resonated. And I'm guessing you just created good enough product or at least good enough communication of product and people and social media started buying organically. I'm guessing that was how it went down. And out of selling things to people on social media, you then eventually made up your mind that the best next thing was to create a show, which I'm guessing was in Copenhagen, which was a great way to test out the vision. Again, big risk associated that you didn't understand, but the benefit was that through creating that show ambitiously, you fumbled your way into success of that show, and fumbling your way into that success really, really made you understand all of the different parts that go into doing all of that process very correctly, right? And from that lesson, you then decided to then move forward into Paris. Of course, during this process, everything was reinforcing, right? You were continuing on improving the product. Uh, People were still buying online, and the relationship that you had with customers online was still improving. You did the presentation in Copenhagen. It was a success from a communication. It was superficially like a success. You learned a lot. You then reapplied everything you learned into Paris, but you probably also fumbled your way into success into Paris. But this gave you a perfect overview of everything that has to be done, right? What roles do we have to hire? What type of infrastructure do we need? What things do I focus on? What things do Victor or Julius focus on? And then how do we continuously improve and repeat from there?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, the separation between what Victor does and what I do is quite clear and has been quite clear. But we obviously overlap in a lot of different ways. So like everything from strategy, to yeah, like how are we seeing the bigger picture of things? Like all of those things overlap. But it's always been quite clear that he takes care of like all of the business directions, and I take care of all of like the creative directions.
Right. By the way, how long do I have you for? So you have to rush into whatever you got going next.
I mean, honestly, I just have to be in the swimming pool before they close, which is at 9. So that means 1 hour from now I should be in the pool. So
Oh,
like
so
half
but
an hour more.
Oh, okay, cool, cool, perfect. Yeah, because I can
Yeah.
talk about these things for hours, so I have to make sure that I stay consistent with my guests and show some
All
empathy on
good.
that end because I
All
never have
good.
anything interesting to do from my end other than this. So
Yeah.
cool, interesting. And what do those like now that you understand everything that had to be done? What was the first thing you did? What were the first hires that you focused on? And not the first hires in terms of interns that are kind of like doing everything and learning with you, like hires with intent, with understanding. Like this is something that I wish I had very early on. Like a guy that's completely focused on sourcing and production and manufacturing. Well, what would those roles be if you could describe them now? What would be your team look?
Uh,
What would your team looking like from a very raw foundational level?
I think that the two very sort of like fundamental things is like someone in charge of production. So supply chain and production. And then, I mean, obviously someone on the business side. So almost like a CFO, someone who's like, making sure that all the products are making sense from a financial standpoint. And then I think it's important to have someone who understands the product, so a product developer, and that's like a product developer slash designer. That would be like my first point. Someone who understands like what's a good design, but also what's a good product. Um, and then like someone who understands merchandising, I think is also very important. So can make sure that
The categories
your
are
whole
consistent,
collection,
that you're focusing on the right things. Yeah.
yeah, like your whole collection makes sense. Like
Mhm.
you don't just because right now you're into um whatever baggy pants, you have like eight baggy pants. That's not how a collection works. And I think that that's important, and I think it's especially important for newer designers to understand that within merchandising there is like still ways that you can communicate your language and your brand, but understanding that it has to be able to complete an entire collection. Yeah, I mean, and then there's tons of roles that are super important. Like,
Of course.
uh, yeah, there are a lot of people within the team that I couldn't live without, and those are super important. But for some people, they might be less important. For me, they're like hugely
Right.
important. And for
Yeah.
some people who are way more focused on e-commerce than someone who's very, very focused on e-commerce is very necessary for your business, and somebody who's extremely focused on, yeah, like creating tailoring products, then obviously you need someone who's a really good pattern maker and someone who understands like that whole part. So all depends on the business, but from the very get go, everyone needs a really good supply chain slash production person and somebody who's like looking at the business from like a financial standpoint as well.
A rational perspective. Yeah.
Rational, yeah.
Mm.
Well, let's call it rational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And the creative director, right? So the creative director that's mainly in charge of the creative vision, the communications, how to get everything communicated and out there into the world. The the production slash supply chain that is getting the specifics of that, what that vision looks like and developing, having the actual products, right? Like this is a vision, but we need the vision and the designer's head looks completely different to like finished product. So making sure that the product matches the vision. And a business person that is just involved in making sure that everything else that happens along that two part of the process is there. The financials are there, the margins are there, the timing and the steps are there, everything that is required for those two parts of the process to sort of like work correctly.
Exactly. That's the three-legged stool that will keep the business upright.
Wow. And you've spoken before about the fashion brand or the fashion business being almost like an equation. And you've roughly covered this now, but now that we have some time to actually think about it, now that we have a business focused audience, what would that equation look like for you now? So you said you so far the creative director, the merchandiser, the supply chain person, the business person, the maybe the CFO, the e-commerce and digital marketing person. What would be that foundational equation? And I know it gets more complex as the brand grows and as the disciplines grow and the areas of focus change, but foundationally speaking, this is part one, those three people. Part two, what does that look like?
I think it's one of those equations where you get the answer, but then you have to, like you have to make up like how the pieces look like. And I think
Mm,
you have to figure out what is your answer because that's what's gonna determine what everything looks like. Because if your answer, if your goal is to grow your e-commerce, then your algorithm or like your equation looks completely different than like if it is to grow your B2B, or if it is to grow your brand awareness, or if it is to grow whatever part of your business. I think the most important thing is that you know exactly where you're going, um, because that's what's going to determine who's going to be, uh, like the necessary components in that equation.
mm,
Because obviously, if I'm saying like, oh, you absolutely need someone who's like full on this part or that part, if that's not where you're trying to go, then like that doesn't make sense to you. So
of
I
course.
think very, very, very clearly narrow down exactly where you want to go, what kind of like brand or what kind of business model or perspective you want to work with, and that can be everything from being a very niche brand driven by few very intricate pieces, or it can be something where it's like we're actually focused on two categories, and those two categories are super high margin, and we can develop something within this like an equation that makes sense for these two, or we want to be more of like this or more like that, because there's one thing that's clear for everyone is that you can't be everything for everyone, right? So you have to kind of like select your path and select your direction. And then once you've determined that part, like obviously you have to reflect on, does this make sense? Is there
Mm,
someone else who's doing this better already? Is there something else that's like um not making sense for where I want to go, and how I want to compete? Do I have the necessary skills to compete with what I'm doing now? Is this what I'm trying to do? Is it even achievable within the perspectives? And then you have to sort of like reverse engineer. Okay, once I have that goal, then what are the components that's going to take me there?
right.
But for sure, 100% is the most crucial thing is determining the overall like goal, and then your whole strategy and shape will make sense.
Right. So it's like it's an adaptive equation for a specific goal. So you have a
Hmm.
specific goal in mind, and then the equation, you start as a hypothesis of the people that might be involved and the equation that is necessary to get to the goal. But then you just need to show continuous awareness to see how the equation is evolving to reach those goals. What parts is it missing? Is that a person? Is that a specific role? Is that a specific project that we can test out? And you continuously iterate on the equation, making sure that there's always progress towards that specific goal. So goal
Exactly.
specific, but adaptable strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. And then also, let's say reconfirming or understanding if your goal is like realistic. Because like that's something that you have to continuously question. If you set like a goal that's extremely ambitious, which is super great, I'm all for that. But at the same time, you have to look at your, like your actual attributes. You have to look at what do I have to work with here?
Right.
What are the financial implications? What are the costs that I'm looking at from a perspective of like brand versus business? What are the implications of like the team that I need to hire? Can I actually achieve this?
Mm.
I might have the finances or anything, but is it realistic to get seven people hired within this amount of time or within that? Or like if I'm hiring this person, do I also need like four other people in that same equation?
Right.
Um,
Of
yeah,
course.
that kind of stuff.
So realistic goals, because if the goal is too high or too unrealistic, in the process of iterating to find the equation might collapse within itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're off to a bad start.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Oh man, there's so many things I want to ask. Okay, just to make sure I wrap everything up now that we're on the topic. Something that's been very surprising about you and the brand specifically is the financial allocation. So how smart you've been and or disciplined you've been with money. Because it started, everything was self-funded, no investment. It was just you side jobs to fund the project and continuously reinvesting everything. I know you did that for a while. So the first 3 years, you guys didn't pay yourself literally anything, and you were just reinvesting profits into the brand. So what's the overall finance? And I call it's I mean, just knowing where to put money in the brand is just called financial allocation for the listeners that maybe it's a little bit too technical. But what was the what's the approach? What was the approach from the very beginning? I mean, it was just how did you know where to put the profits in the early on versus how do you know how to manage it now?
I mean, that's the ever going
That's the
question,
question.
like
Yeah.
yeah, you never really know, like you never really know, but obviously having a plan and trying to stick to that plan is important, like if but you never truly know that what you're doing will have a financial like return on the other end. You can place a bet and that can be a pretty safe bet, but you never really know for certain.
Right.
And I think we didn't know from the beginning, and I think we were quite um irrational when I say, like doing a lot of shows, doing a lot of like activities, doing a lot of things, really just like trying to grow the brand very, very, like out of our yeah, like our two hands kind of thing. And I wouldn't say it's like irresponsible, but it's at the same time it's like ambitious,
Right.
and not thinking about certain aspects of the finances until like a certain point. But I think now we're to a certain extent more rational than when we've ever been. And I think that's necessary. Like be a little bit more critical in terms of spreading out, so that that it's not all eggs in one basket, or
Right.
yeah, like
Yeah, it's just
it's
almost like an awareness of risk. Like your awareness and understanding of the risk associated with your actions increases. And as you need to understand that you'll never know how to allocate budgets or what the best thing to do might be. Just your awareness of the biggest risks are a little bit more educated. And as long as you're intuitively moving along, having some idea of the risks and preventing catastrophes, stuff kind of like works out, hopefully.
yeah, yeah, I guess that. And then I mean also just like planning, and then like looking, do like logical thinking of like like plan to spend this much. How much are you actually spending? Could you be spending less? What would be uh the consequences of spending less, okay, does that then make sense? Like really, and don't be afraid of just like looking at it from a very sort of pragmatic point of view. You had 10, you used 7, could you have used 5? Or like that kind of stuff. Okay, and then uh, that was that week. Okay, then like next week, you try to spend 5, you see what happens, or you say, okay, let me spend 8 and see what happens, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, being quite pragmatic about it and then constantly reviewing. I think that's also important, that you don't like just say, okay, every year we look at like what's happening in the business, but look at it from week to week. Look at
Hmm.
like how much are you spending? Could you be spending less? Planning. Okay, these are like the big expenses that are gonna come in. Does that make sense? Like budgeting towards something that makes sense. Again, like it doesn't have to be super super complicated, because I'm guessing most of the people that would look up to us are smaller in size, and from that point, like you have the overview of like all the components of your business, so it's within your control, so you should
Right.
be able to dial those knobs like up and down. So I
Right.
think, yeah, that's the part of it. Don't be afraid to kind of like adjust and like do things based on the things that are happening in your business, and then review constantly, like look at the things that are happening, and then see how you can progress and move from there.
Of course. So don't get overwhelmed. Everybody is aware of the business disregarding their size. You should have an intuitive understanding of the business. The way to financially allocate is just a matter of saying, how do I spend $1 and get 3 back? Or how do I spend less money? Or how do I spend 50 cents and get 3 back? And that's
Yeah,
essentially okay.
yeah,
Simple,
I
right?
mean,
Simple. It's difficult because it's a lot of different situations, but essentially it's money in versus money out. How aware am I of my current business? How aware am I of how the money that I invest can bring things back, or the money that I invest, how can I keep things lower next time?
exactly, yeah. And
Hmm.
I think also just being aware of all the facets that go into a certain thing. So, like you might think that um, you you make something for X amount and you sell it for higher amount, but and then you think that you're making money off of that product, right? But really, if you think about all the aspects that go into that specific thing, is that still making sense?
Right.
Because all of what
Yeah.
needs to be calculated in that product is not the price of the product. It is also the people involved,
Marketing.
like the marketing involved, the all the pieces of the puzzle that makes that product exist. Everything from the packaging to the delivery to the people involved to the marketing around it to everything on that product, and making sure that all of those things, even the development of that product, like how much time, how much effort, how much back and forth with, like, if it's a manufacturer, like what was the cost on developing that product, that should also be included in that same like context. And I'm
Of
and I'm
course.
sure people from a business perspective, they know these things, but I'm not sure that every creative knows that,
Hmm.
when I sell or when I create something at 5 and sell it for 10, then I must be making money. But that's not always
Right.
the case.